If you want to make faster progress and submit more opponents in jiu-jitsu, you need to know how to properly train at each belt level. In this video, I talked to the most controversial coach in jiu-jitsu, Greg Souders. Greg is flipping the jiu-jitsu world upside down with something called the constraints-led approach. The constraints-led approach has sparked a ton of controversy in the jiu-jitsu community, with some people saying that it's only appropriate for white belts and some people even saying that it's just hype and doesn't even really work at all. However, Greg has been using this method of training with his students for years and proving many of the naysayers wrong, with his students quickly rising to the top and becoming some of the best submission grapplers on the planet. If you want to supercharge your jiu-jitsu progress in 2025, keep watching this video to learn how to use the constraints-led approach from white belt all the way up to black belt. So I think there's a lot of people that see what you guys do at Standard Jiu-Jitsu. They see the things your athletes are doing, but they're training at a place that still has a traditional jiu-jitsu format. Do 10, 15 minutes of running around doing warm-ups, 30 minutes of static drilling technique, 45 minutes of just open mat rolling. So some people may see the stuff that you talk about on Mark Bell's Power Project and the constraints-led approach, but might be a little lost on how to implement some of those things into their own training. So one thing I'd like to ask you is, if someone's a white belt, so say less than 2 years of experience, what would you say are one or two things that they should focus on to begin starting to implement some of the constraints-led approach into their own training?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is grapple. We need to do live matches. We need to do live exchanges. Whether we work in a whole game, meaning starting from the feet or going all the way to submission, or a part game where we start in a specific situation and work towards some end, we need to be live grappling. Live grappling, that interaction, is what builds the context for our focus. So by experiencing what it's like to move and pull and tug and do things to bodies, we can now ask ourselves the important question: what is my intention here? While I'm experiencing this play, what am I trying to do? So really, first, grapple. Gain a little bit of context. Okay, I know what grappling feels like. I kind of see what I'm doing. Now, what do you want to do with this situation? So again, grapple a lot, and then we set intentions for ourselves once we have a little bit of contextual understanding. As a new player, it can feel like a huge world of like, where do I start? Should I do this? Should I do this? So my advice would be start anywhere. Start with something that interests you. Start with something that excites you. Start by copying your favorite grappler. All are great answers. But we have to grapple, and we have to have intention when we do so. So again, like I said, we can take those intentions from things that excite us, things that we've seen other people do, things that we're just imagining, doesn't matter. But we have to put that into play in the real world.
One thing you mentioned on the podcast was continuous games and terminal games. Do you mind breaking that down a little bit?
Sure.
Real quick?
So the way that we think about the interactions that we want to happen are based on really where we're getting our athlete to go. So we can separate, at least in our school and the way I do things, the rounds into having two real types of constraint that we use. One is a continuous constraint. This is where we set up a situation, we give our athlete a task focus for a condition we want them to continuously fulfill so they can experience time in that exchange. An example would be something like standing passer versus belly up guard player. Standing passer's goal is to make sure the feet aren't touching them, and we're gonna get to the outside of the legs, stay to the outside of the legs as long as we can, without dropping down chest to chest or chest to back. There is no win condition. We just try to do this for as long as possible. That would be an example of a continuous game. And again, we use those to gain experience in a specific exchange over a long period of time. Terminal games are games where we set similar focuses of attention, like clear the feet and work to the outside, but we would give terminal outcomes that would end the game and switch it into something else. So we could use the previous example, and we could say, rather than get to the outside of the legs and play continuously, if once I get to the outside of the legs, if I'm able to make chest to chest or chest to back contact, that's the win. Change top and bottom. Now it's the other player's turn to do the other thing. And so this is just how we catalog the two types that we might use when having people engage in specific activities.
Gotcha. So if someone's a white belt and they're starting to want to implement these things into their own training, a practical example could be, okay, they go to class, they do the warm-up, they do the 45 minutes of technique, then it's time for open rolling. A continuous game that they can make for themselves is, hey, I'm going to try to hold the person's back on the mat and keep their feet off of me as long as possible.
Beautiful.
And that would be their intention that they're bringing to that game.
That's correct.
And then a terminal version of that would be, I'm going to try to keep their feet off of me, put them on their back, and get the chest-to-chest connection.
Absolutely.
And then they would reset and then do the game again.
Or let's imagine that you're in a school where you're not allowed to communicate what you're doing and it's just an open round. You can actually constrain the continuity or the terminality of the exchange in your own mind. So let's imagine you really want to make it terminal. I'm going to get to the outside of the feet. I'm going to create chest-to-chest or chest-to-back contact. You don't have to tell them that when you get there, that's a success for you. Get there, lift back up, and let it continue and see if you can do it again. You don't necessarily have to communicate your goals to the other player. This will allow you to set constraints and tasks for yourself and use them when other people aren't being cooperative. That way you can see the limits of your own ideas. You know, you don't necessarily need cooperation or structure. You can set intentions without it.
Gotcha. Okay, that's awesome. I think that's super helpful for white belts. If we move up in experience level, say someone's a blue belt, so 2 to 4 years of experience, maybe they've competed once or twice. As a coach, and the suggestions for the viewers, what would you say someone can do to implement the constraints-led approach into their own training now that they have a little bit more experience? They might be in a position where they kind of have a lot better idea of what they should do. They just really struggle with actually making it happen.
So let's reframe it just a little bit. Let's imagine a blue belt is an advanced beginner that has now a lot of data about the effect of their actions. They've learned how to do some things to some people, but there's still a lot of stuff they don't understand. That data, we can use that as a way to guide our intentions. So let's say you're really good at getting outside the legs and creating chest-to-chest or chest-to-back contact, and maybe you've gone to competition, you've performed that well. But there's a type of player where you can't get to the outside of their feet. So you could take that as a way to inform future practice. Okay, well, maybe I'll try to go through the legs and try to see if I can get past the legs that way. So now you set a new task. Okay, I'm going to clear the feet like I've been doing, but rather than step to the outside, I'm going to step to the inside, and I'm going to try to go through the legs to make connection around the hips, chest, shoulders, and back. And so we can take the data of previous experience, note where we're having successes and our strengths are, note where we're having failures and our weaknesses, and then we just shift our focus from the things we've developed into new things that we want to develop. And now those become your new intentions for practice.
Is there a certain way you would suggest an athlete try to collect some of that data and have like strong before and afters? I think you've talked about before like the relationship of cause and effect. So like, do you suggest people like film their roles? If they're a blue belt and they have a little bit more experience, they're going to try to pass through the legs instead of around the legs. Do you suggest people journal? What would you suggest for?
I suggest pick the medium that is going to inspire you to continue to track yourself the most. If you prefer to have a little journal you keep around and writing is enough for you to keep that focus throughout time, do that. If you don't like to do that and you'd prefer to watch what's happening yourself, do that. Do both. Do everything. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one mechanism for understanding. Try to attack it from as many directions as you can to keep yourself consistently on that path of improvement. I use all methods. I watch myself. I watch my students. I take notes on both. I watch other players. But again, to be more specific about the individual tracking themselves, pick whichever medium that you feel you can stick to the most.
Nice. Awesome. So moving up in experience level, say someone's a purple belt, they're kind of middle of the road. When they go to training, there are quite a few people who that they can just kind of smoke throughout training. There's also people that are going to smoke them. They're kind of in that frustrated middle ground. How would you suggest someone who's wanting to implement some of the constraints-led approach kind of scale the games or scale the tasks based on who they're rolling with, whether it's someone that they have a lot more experience than, or they're going against someone who's super tough and they're less experienced than?
So I think in that case now, as a purple belt or somebody with lots of data and now many skill sets that we can express in different ways, you're going to start to become more specific. So as we advance through the ranks, we really note those weaknesses now. So now they're less. So a purple belt is going to beat most people below them that don't have as much experience. So for the advancing player, we want to find that line for challenge. It might, rather than being like a blue belt, the 6 guys in the room that could beat you up with these situations, maybe there's only 2 now. And so now we just kind of shift our focus towards that. So we're always looking for that failure point, that point where we feel weak. And we try to hold that line when we're talking about building and acquiring new skill. We can also use this, our new abilities that we've used to progress to the purple belt level, as a way to sort of revisit maybe strong skills in different ways. So maybe one day we want to set an intention that really challenges the current skill we possess so we can get a new one, or maybe we want to take a current skill and we want to change it. So now we have a bunch of guys that are easier for us, and we can use those easier guys to maybe revisit things and not feel as stressed while doing it. So I think the only thing that really changes between the levels is what we do with the experience we've gained and how we use that experience to guide future learning.
Gotcha.
Is that too vague or?
No, that's great. It kind of leads me to another question kind of on that point. As someone is growing in experience, do they need to switch towards more continuous-based games versus terminal games, or are running continuous games with people who are less experienced than you better than running terminal-based games? How would you kind of balance those two depending on who you're training with?
So I don't like to use better or worse. I like to use effective. So for each athlete, for each individual, based on their goals, the things we choose are either going to be more or less effective to help us reach those outcomes.
Okay.
It's a hard answer to give, because as a coach, or even as someone who's guiding yourself, you have to know yourself. You have to know your training partners. You have to experience building those relationships. So we could say that right now, this training protocol might benefit me the most. So let's imagine you're struggling with something where you have a new skill, but you get tired while doing it. That might be a great time to implement a continuous game where you have to enact the skill over a greater period of time to build both that skill and the capacity to enact that skill. Or maybe you're in a situation where you're with a lower ranked guy and you're just smoking them. You could just make it terminal every time. Maybe not. Maybe get to the point, don't finish it, go back. Get to the point, don't finish it, go back. So having something be continuous or terminal, we just pull those levers based on the effect that choosing either might have on the individual choosing.
Gotcha. That makes sense. If I understand correctly, just to confirm, if the continuous games are really to like get lots and lots of exposure to that thing,
set of conditions,
that set of conditions, and then terminal is much more based on like, this is the end goal, this is the directive that we're going towards, and we want to be able to accomplish that as many times as possible.
It's a great way to say it, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe just something else too that we could add to that is, we could say continuous is very exploratory, where we're searching a large space over time, where terminal is more like explicit, like, or exploitative. I'm going to exploit this every time I can and see if I can reach that outcome. We either want to explore the space or exploit the space. Continuous games are more exploratory. Terminal games are more exploitative. So we exploit the situation.
One thing you mentioned on Mark Bell's Power Project was monitoring training intensity in the training room. So is it safe to say that continuous games are a little bit lower intensity because there is a lot more room for exploration, and terminal games are much higher intensity since they're much more direct?
I would say so, but you can also change that based on time too. So if I had to keep a condition for 2 minutes continuously or 6 minutes, it's still continuous in that it's voluminous, but the time would either make it more or less intense. Same thing with terminal. If I had 10 minutes to complete a task once, that's less intense. If I had 3 minutes to complete a task twice, that's very intense. So we can mix and match how we judge volume and intensity, not only using the continuity or terminality of a task, but under the time constraints that we're trying to operate under either. Or partner selection can affect that too.
Gotcha.
So trying to do something to your black belt buddy who's been beating you up for 5 years in a 2-minute window is way more intense than doing it to your white belt friend who you're teaching.
Moving up the ranks a little bit. So we get to brown belt, lots of experience, to use some of your words, lots of data points. Say this person is competing a lot. They really want to kind of break into the next level of competition and going from kind of a hobbyist competitor to being someone that's a little bit more of a serious competitor. They're probably also one of the better guys in the room since they're putting so much more emphasis on preparing for competition and all of that stuff. For someone that is really looking to kind of make waves in competition and kind of bring their skills up to a world-class level, what are some tips or some changes you would make to their training approach using the constraints-led approach?
So I would try to gear all their intentions and attention, all their focuses, all the stuff we're trying to build around people who are like them. So when you're trying to test your skills at a competitive level, you need to train them with people who have a similar mentality. They don't need to actually be competitors, but they have to have that competitive spirit. They have to find importance in the task they're doing. the emotion that we approach our intentions with color the intention. So if getting your guard pass is very important to stop for you, you're going to fight harder. Therefore, the person passing your guard must fight harder. And that's reflective of competition. Since competition is a high urgency situation, we want to bring some of that urgency to training. So if you're a brown and black belt who want to reach a higher level, the urgency in training, not all the time, but a lot of the time, should match the urgencies present in the performance environment. So I think that would be one of the larger changes I would make.
Gotcha.
Bring like-minded individuals together and challenge them amongst each other with these constraints, with these tasks, with these intentional and attentional focuses.
That kind of brings me into my next question. If someone is a black belt, they're teaching most of the classes where the intentions that people have, there may be other guys in those classes that are lower experience level, but just don't have the skills to kind of match that, the same skill as the instructor. How would someone who has such a higher amount of skill than some of the other people they're training with, as a black belt, wanted to move into higher levels of competition, how would they make tweaks to their training to kind of get that effect? Do they need to drive somewhere like standard jiu-jitsu and just get into tougher rooms? Do they need to bring people up faster in their own gym? What does that look like?
That's a tough one. The short answer is, yeah, you need to be around like-minded people. And people want a better answer. They want a soft answer. They're like, oh yeah, the average guy who kind of takes it. I'm sorry, man, that's not for you. And that's okay. Like, you have a group and your problems are going to be different within your group than the guy who's trying to be elite. So we really have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to get the competitive thinkers and the competitive performers with each other, because that stimuli is the system that the agent is going to act around. So me as the performer, I need to perform. And so if there's not enough stress, performance doesn't go up. So again, that level of stress is necessary. We can't cheat it. Some strategies we could use is, let's imagine I'm with a bunch of guys who are underskilled and they're worse than me. I could put myself in extremely weak situations that are like awful for me, and I could use that as a training tool. We could use pre-fatigue. I could do a bunch of sprints up and down the mat and then put myself in terrible positions and try to get out. The goal is to try to find the challenge point and see if it can be met in the current environment that you're putting yourself in.
Last question. If someone is running their own school and they've been doing it in a very traditional way, like a lot of jiu-jitsu schools are currently doing it, they see the podcast that you've done, they tune into Mark Bell's Power Project, and they're going to decide like, okay, I want to actually start implementing some of these constraint-led approaches with my own students. Where would you suggest someone start? It seems like it's a big culture shock in a lot of ways, especially if they have a huge student base that's used to doing it one specific way. Where would you suggest someone starts integrating and kind of making the change for their own school?
Assuming that they have been exposed to information, or are they searching for information to help inform their practice?
Let's answer both.
Okay.
Some people have been exposed to it. Some people this is the first time they're hearing about it, and they're like, how do I get started?
Okay, so if you've already been exposed to why we choose these methods, start applying them. Forget about messing up. Forget about looking silly. Decide what you want for your practice and implement it right away. If you want to learn how to pass the guard, you're only moving legs. So start moving legs out of the way. Start doing it against everybody. Start noting points where I move the legs out of the way really well like this, so I'm going to keep trying it. I feel like it's difficult like this, so what could I do differently? Really start applying your ideas in live training immediately. If you don't know anything about the method using CLA, learn about it. If you don't know why the method's being chosen, you're not going to know which levers to pull. You're not going to know why this training intervention might be better than this one. So we have to understand why it's being said that we should train this way. The books I introduce, or I try to get everyone to read first, are Dr. Rob Gray's books. How We Learn to Move, Learning to Optimize Movement, and now How to Become an Ecological Coach. I think, I've said it in the podcast, I think Rob does a really great job at taking difficult to understand academic information and distilling it down for anyone to read. So I would start there. Again, learn just a little bit to get started and get started,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah,
this has been fantastic.
For sure.
I just want to say I'm so appreciative of just how generous you've been with your time and sharing the information. We've had calls together. You never charged me anything. I've bugged you with a ton of questions and you always answer them. And it's been really impactful for my own training. And I think a lot of people are starting to catch on to the constraints-led approach and seeing a lot of great results. And it's awesome that you're someone who's just so generous with what you've learned and your time. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome, sir. And just to say why, because I think this is important, is I think we're caught in this world of sales and marketing. How can I sell everything? How can I sell everything? But if everything has a price point, when do we actually get to have conversations as two people trying to accomplish a common end? I don't want to be that guy that puts anything I've learned behind such a strict paywall where two people can't sit across from each other and learn from one another. That's not my bag. So I'm happy to do it. And I'm glad you found value in it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Catch you guys later. Peace.